It's Thursday, April 7th, 2011. I'm Rim, and this is Geek Nights. Tonight, Michio Kaku's Hyperspace on the GeekNights Book Club.
Let's do this.
It was kind of amazing at work that, and I'm sitting there working on some code or something, and suddenly...
I didn't remember what you were working on.
Suddenly I noticed that it didn't really matter. The market dropped like 0.6%.
Is that a lot? Well, the whole market almost 1%. Yeah, that's
basically
a lot.
there's this huge dip suddenly.
That's 6 1/100ths. No.
So basically, think about this: the market dips
6 1,000s.
suddenly, and I see all these alarms like and I wonder, all right, what happened? I have CNBC and everything on, and all the news feeds, and there's nothing. I go to FARC, and there's nothing. I go to Twitter, and I just start to see a couple of tweets coming in about Aftershock, and then minutes later, the news is like, oh shit, an Aftershock hit Japan. Everything's mostly okay, and all the news after that. But the fact that the market reacted before I think any human at least in the United States, knew that there was an Aftershock was amazing.
Well, this is something I wonder about, right? It's like, where did that movement come from, right?
So my guess...
We know that there are people out there who have trading systems hooked up to news feeds, but they wouldn't be able to react for minutes,
Also,
right?
little known fact, you think, there are different ways to do news feeds. One way is to just consume a feed of like text news and do some sort of, algorithm to parse out words or whatever.
There could have been someone on the AP wire, which may have been fast.
But most people...
There could have been a human doing it.
But most people the news feeds that you hear about are actually scores. Someone else does all the work for you with proprietary whatevers, and they send you a score that's like good or bad for this sector or this stock.
Right, but that person is analyzing the same internet news that we're analyzing.
Yes. So my guess as to what happened, and obviously I'm not speaking to any particular stock, nor am I giving investment advice, is that...
let me call the SEC. I'll see what they think about
Is that because it happened in Japan, right? Mm-hmm. So there were reactions in the financial sector in Japan, which triggered things in the U.S. almost immediately.
So the Japanese people clicked on, manually trading.
Oh, no, I don't think...
Because the market was open, and then those movements were automatically detected by computer systems in the U.S. that automatically traded.
My other guess is that...
Or Japanese people traded on the American exchanges.
No, because the latency back to the U.S. and then to Japan again is pretty high. The market reacted
but it's not
quickly.
It's not minutes.
No, it's not minutes.
It's seconds.
But it was just kind of amazing. Remember when people were pointing out that the tweets are far faster than actual earthquakes?
Yeah. So this gave me an idea, actually.
Nah.
So these people are trading based on news, right? From the news, and they're trying to parse things that journalists have written or the AP has written in English to make trades.
Well, most people are parsing more complex data feeds that score the news based on...
Right, but it's based on looking at news written in English, which is then turned into a score.
Yes, to a degree. Though I just want to qualify that some of that news is actually formatted in kind of reliable ways, like it's normalized data, like I don't know, corporate actions that happen.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. So but here's an idea I had.
Yeah?
What if we put sensors all over the world of different varieties? For example,
detect a disaster and sell.
Right, we have a seismograph in Japan, and if we can program it to put it connected to a computer, or it is a computer, if there's too much earthquake in this area, sell.
You could do that.
It would be way faster than the guy parsing the news, and we would make
there's
money.
no guy parsing the news. It's algos.
I'm just saying it would be faster than the news algorithm, because those few seconds where someone types in that news story, we're beating them.
Well, the news the way to use a news feed like that is more to prime other decision-making systems.
It doesn't matter. We can make money because we'd be faster. You're saying milliseconds usually count. This is on the order of seconds.
So here's the trouble. You can't guarantee that the market will drop or not. A similar earthquake in a different place in a different time wouldn't have had this reaction, and the market recovered almost all the way.
Well, this is why you have to have, it's not just a simple decision hooked up to the data. It's you have the algo hooked up to this raw data and not just one seismograph in Japan, right? I'm talking about get all kinds of data. Hook it up to weather stations around the world.
Scott, I can guarantee
especially
you.
Seismographs.
I can guarantee
satellites
to you.
taking photos in real time.
Scott, I can guarantee to you that there are small outfits out there that are looking at the goddamn weather and trying to see how it correlates to stocks.
But I'm saying not just weather, right? That's just one example.
Scott,
of
anything,
raw.
everything. They're looking at anything they can.
We can get something that checks like radio wave activity, and stuff like that.
Yeah, if there's any possible link
So
that could be
we can
exploited.
detect increased cell phone and Wi-Fi activity in localized areas.
Scott, if there's any possible link to anything, people are doing it.
I don't know. I haven't heard about anyone doing these sorts of
What,
things.
you don't know anything about how it even works.
We can hook it something up to, detecting tides and ocean movements and
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you got any news? It's Thursday. We can talk about whatever we want.
We often give government a hard time because, it doesn't usually do stuff that makes us happy.
Yeah, well,
Especially when it's making laws. It
We are-
usually does a bad job.
the worst thing is it's getting better pretty much constantly, except the 8 years when Bush was in office. Oh, but it's getting better just because we're smarter and we have more access to information than previous generations as a whole. We're very aware of the glacial pace of change.
But anyway, I just wanted to, highlight a good law, or what I consider to be a good law.
A good law.
You might disagree. It's a new good law. It's a New York law. It's just a few weeks old, right? But it's really good. So basically, there was this problem, and the problem is that, the vast majority of crimes, and especially assaults and batteries and those sorts of things, are domestic disturbances.
Yep,
right?
closed door versus open door crimes.
Yes. Now, the fact is, I wasn't aware of this problem, right? That a lot of people, when they get mad, instead of punching and kicking or beating with a frying pan or whatever, they do some strangling activity. And maybe they don't strangle someone to death, but, they give someone a nice choke, right?
Yeah.
And what happens...
I mean, what's the phrase? Choke a motherfucker?
That's right.
Choke a bitch?
Apparently, what was happening for a very long time is that when you choke somebody, there wasn't a whole lot of evidence. Because by the time anyone gets there, you're done gasping for air, right? You didn't really leave any bruises.
Yeah, because if you choked him enough to bruise him, there's probably enough permanent injury to
Right.
where... Oh.
There might have been red marks around your neck, but they fade.
So, Scott, I just want to point out, we're going to have a second follow-up law now, or follow-up forensic evidence. We need a way to handle the sack full of doorknobs problem.
I know, but anyway. The point is that a lot of people who strangled somebody were getting away with it or getting very reduced sentences because of the lack of evidence or the lack of quality evidence. There is a new law in New York. It's just a few weeks old. That's basically like it's a strangling law. It's like strangling is illegal, and this is what you do if there's a strangling. Right?
All right.
And so far, how many times do you think they have used this strangling law in just a few weeks? Not even a month. How many times do you think this law has been used?
To quote Futurama, you wouldn't ask unless it was either really high or really low. I'm going to say 411.
So far, in just less than a month, right, they have arrested 2,000 people.
How many bitches need choking?
For
Jeez.
strangling with this new law. So there you go. A quality new law that seems to be working. Government did a good thing for once in 30 years.
Now, how do you know? How do you know they're not arresting people who didn't actually strangle?
There's actually some interesting things in this law about, like, if there was a strangling, then you got it. Then it means that you have to investigate DNA evidence, which previously they would not investigate in such a case, and such and such. So there's actually here's what it is. The new law recognizes the seriousness of the offense and has teeth sharp enough to keep a convicted offender behind bars or under scrutiny. Under the new strangulation law, anyone convicted of either felony or misdemeanor counts must submit a DNA sample to authorities. So yada yada. So basically, if there's a strangling involved, right, there's going to be a whole bunch more evidence, right, to actually make sure that the it sticks, as opposed to getting away with it because there wasn't any bruising or whatever.
Yep. Well,
and since most of these strangling people are people who've had run-ins with the law previously, they've got DNA on them, so they can look at the person's neck and say, yeah, this dude is strangled, and then what are you going to do about it?
Now, the next step, of course, is what do we do about this? Because all domestic violence and, crimes of passion like that in general are usually driven by poor impulse control, which is correlated with all sorts of things, ranging from bad nutrition to bad upbringing.
It says here domestic abusers aren't usually first-time offenders, and we're expecting to see that as people get convicted of these offenses, it will lead to solving other crimes.
But what?
So that you find a guy who's strangling somebody, he's probably done something else. You found him, and you look and you say, "Oh, yep, this is the guy who did the whatever."
So you find a guy who's guilty of, I don't know, some computery crime. Oh, he might be doing weed.
Maybe.
That's a bad path.
That is. Well, but that's just, there's nothing you can do about that as long as the weed's illegal. This is a separate issue from the strangling.
Yeah.
And plus, now the Boston Strangler will get him.
Yeah, because he totally wouldn't have done it if that law was there.
I know, he was getting away with it all those years, but now finally, the glacial pace of government, after how many centuries, we finally made it illegal to strangle.
Luckily,
so we can get the Boston Strangler.
Just in time for the government to shut itself down.
Whatever. It's the New York government, not the federal government.
Well, it's kind of this thing where, because we were
Plus,
just arguing.
the thing is,
we were just arguing in the forum about the problem where laws are often passed with a supposed deterrent effect, even though the punishments are shown to not actually deter. But in a case like this, where there's clear evidence of recidivism and linked crimes, it seems like this is a case where it will be a deterrent effect.
Well, this is basically a case of law was no good, right? It's we had laws against a certain thing, but there was a loophole. You can get away with it if you strangled instead of punching someone in the face. So people were strangling, so now you can't get away with it just because you're strangling.
Now,
Makes perfect sense.
That does imply a secondary thing. If this is true, it implies that there is a significant number of people, who wanted to punch someone and then they had that moment of restraint where they thought, oh shit, I might get caught if I punch them.
I think it was more that they happened to strangle and then they happened to get away with it because they did.
Or
they weren't
maybe
thinking about it.
because choking a bitch requires far more dedication to your choking cause. I mean, if you want to
But
hit
they weren't
someone,
choking him to death. You're not going to get away with that shit.
Oh yeah, but even a little bit. I mean, I punch someone, like say I get mad, I go bam, and I punch someone. All right. Maybe I'm not mad 3 seconds later, but it only took me a half a second to punch.
Mm-hmm.
But to even reach out and start strangling, by the time you're proper choking, it's been some seconds. And if you want to maintain that choke for any reasonable amount of time, you got to really want it because they're going to fight back.
Unless you're just way bigger than they are. They're
So-
not fighting back.
So you had a good law. Let's talk about a bad law. I learned recently that Cuyahoga, which is the name of the guy who accidentally caused Dude Bro, my shit is fucked
Well,
up.
that's his internet name is Cuyahoga.
So I got to shoot/slice you. It's straight up dog time.
No, it's Dude Bro. My shit is
It's
fucked up,
so I got to shoot/slice you. Two. It's straight up dog time. Well, Cuyahoga is also the name of a town, Cuyahoga Falls.
I've heard of this town.
I've heard of it now that I think about that.
I knew if you said what's Cuyahoga Falls, I would have said a town in the Midwest.
Yeah, but before we're like, yeah, and this guy.
Where is it in the Midwest?
Ohio.
Oh, it makes sense.
Yeah, Cuyahoga. Cuyahoga Falls has a really white mare.
No.
And this really white mare is afraid of those goth kids with their piercings and those gangbangers hanging out on the riverfront intimidating everybody else, and these dangerous kids listening to their quote hippity hop music hanging out under bridges.
So the old people voted for an old guy,
And the
the
old guy-
kids got nowhere to hang out in town except for the old cool bridges
No,
down by the boardwalk.
So this story
On the
is
river.
just great because the what he's done.
Why doesn't he make a park for the kids to hang out in so they don't hang out in the riverfront because they got nowhere else to be?
Oh, so maybe they were hanging
Make
out
a
in the
skating
parks.
rink or something.
But his town, much like my town when I was a kid after I moved out of Detroit, he has passed or proposed to pass a curfew for anyone under 18.
Well, they're under 18. That's the law. What are you going to do?
Yeah, unless maybe we signed the Human Rights Accord.
Yeah, right? No.
So I have many things to say about this article, and it's just funny that it happened to take place in Cuyahoga
Yeah.
Falls.
Of course, I greatly disagree with this idea of a curfew, but they're under 18. That's the law. And, I want to change that law a great deal, but nothing I can do about
No,
it.
but I still, you can disagree with the law, independent of the realities of voting. But here's my
Well, it's the realities of the Constitution.
point
You're
the
not-
one. All right, maybe if this guy had just had a generic statement and a generic law, like we're going to have a curfew because of rising crime, rising youth-related crime, something like that. The fact that he earnestly is afraid of people with piercings and goth-style clothing and spiky hair and hanging out under bridges. It's like he's afraid of the opening montage from The Lost Boys. Now, I recently watched The Lost Boys again. You know what? It really holds up as a vampire movie. It's got Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, Kiefer Sutherland. It's a great movie about vampires before vampires were cool. 80s movie. And it's set in the 80s, right? But you know, a lot of movies that are made in the 80s, they're not set in the 80s. They're just made in the 80s. So
there's all this 80s stuff, even though they weren't trying to set it in the 80s.
Yeah, like they have that crappy synthy music and the montages.
Especially if they try to set it in the future, but they made it in the 80s, there'll be stuff like keytars and shit like that. It'll look like, what's the name of the teacher in Ponies?
Oh, Cheerilee?
Yeah, look like, Cheerilee's, high school photo.
But Cheerilee's high school, that was more like early 90s.
Yeah, even so.
Early to mid, that was that style. That was Punky Brewster.
Even so, right? It's like, they made in the 80s, the future looked like the future 80s.
But there's movies that happen to have been made in the 80s, so they look like shit today. But then there are movies that even if they were made in the 80s or not, they were set in the 80s, but they didn't have the meta constructs of the 80s. Like the music isn't shitty 80s synth. It's just music from the 80s. So The Lost Boys is like that. It's a great movie and you should watch it, but I digress. The opening montage of Lost Boys shows all the scary weirdos on the boardwalk while it plays the cover of The Doors' People Are Strange. And it's just like, yeah, look at that scary guy. He's wearing all black. Oh my God, that guy's got a mohawk and he's on a motorcycle. Watch the fuck out. And it seems like this guy from Ohio is afraid of that, but I see people like that every day just like walking around in Midtown.
And they're usually not scary at all.
In fact, people who dress the way people were afraid of scary people in the 80s, like the people that 80s people were afraid of in the 80s, are the nerds today.
Yep.
The guy with the mohawk is the gamer nerd more often than not.
That's true. He's playing that dangerous Dungeons and Dragons.
It's like this guy just came here out of 1981 and passed a curfew. And I have more to say because curfews suck and there was a curfew. I ran away from the police at least every other night as a kid because of the fucking curfew. And, I'd just be out at night getting into trouble. But that's it. I just kind of ranted for a while. There's no news that I want to talk about yet.
Yeah. All right.
Because it's time for Things of the Day. Got a thing of the day?
Yeah, so there is a little meme, quick meme. I guess it's on Reddit or something.
This is pretty great.
Right? It says, if you are religious, don't look at this. If not, enjoy. So it's a meme, and all of it is, it's one of those, head in the middle, picture of someone's head in the middle of a square with sort of a starburst and some text on the top and the bottom in the impact font. You know that. And there's a lot of them.
I believe what the kids use to call that is a macro.
Right, so let me just read the first few of these. There's many, many pages of them. Ready? It's a picture of God's face, from, the roof of the Sistine Chapel. At least that's what it looks like. It might be a different God. It doesn't matter. It's God's face. And he says, I hurricane cities because they're gay people, usually in hurricane-prone areas during hurricane season. Libyans being slaughtered? Too busy helping millionaires win golden statuettes. Make sex really awesome. Forbid it. I gave you free will, so use it exactly as I command you to. Create world for humans. 70% salt water. Day 1, create light. Day 4, create light source. Ban sex before marriage. Impregnate unmarried virgin. Demand Adam and Eve follow a rule that requires the understanding of right and wrong. Don't give Adam and Eve the knowledge of right and wrong. And it keeps going.
There are
forbid the eating of pork. Make pork delicious.
I think that's the best one.
Create mechanical and scientific universe. Punish those who don't believe in the supernatural. Create man with foreskin. Command him to cut it off.
I love that those sorts of things like the courage wolf or the courage burrage. There's something about that style of meme of statement that has just never worn thin with me.
Yeah, this is there's 6 pages of this stuff, so there's plenty for you to read.
In fact,
on
there's
your own.
only one meme of this style that I enjoy more than this particular one, and that is the haha guy.
Haha guy?
So
I'm making fun of God's inconsistencies.
my thing of the day here is just it's a complaint, but I can't really justify complaining because am not willing to step up and do something better. But we're into the ponies, as all men are, and the only place you can really go to get your pony business is either randomly searching YouTube, which doesn't work, or going to Equestria Daily, which is 90% fan fiction.
You can just ignore the fan fiction, that you can look at all the other sections individually.
Yeah.
And not look at the fan fiction
But
section.
it's not really a filter. It's more like a sieve. It's just every pony thing, and not all of it's good.
Well, it is Equestria Daily, not Equestria Weekly, so they need something.
Yeah, but College Humor is daily, and you know what? Mostly gold, or at least bronze.
Well, because they got a lot more stuff coming in the filters. They can be more selective. The pony stuff, that's pretty much all of it.
Yeah, but the way to make a successful internet filter is you have the slider, like the line of how much do you let through. You have to set it.
The problem with the question is they've already let so much through. It's like if they start filtering more harshly before the source material quantity increases.
Well, this is
it
why
will create drama.
This is
in
why
the
someone
anime
needs to make
communities.
the Ponyville Street Journal. That
Uh-huh.
is the erudite version that only posts
And has no fan fiction whatsoever.
no fan fiction whatsoever,
Yeah.
except comics, which, while technically fan fiction, I think you agree,
Yeah.
they're fan fiction, but they're okay because they're short.
Yep.
And they're drawn.
Yep.
There's a barrier to entry.
A higher barrier to entry.
So because there's a lot
And
of
I would still deny comics that weren't funny or were poorly drawn.
Yep. But because there is not a lot of great pony stuff, and a lot of it's actually kind of hard to find, my thing of the day is just a really awesome pony video.
Notice I've been laying off the ponies entirely in the podcast since we actually had a pony episode.
Yep.
Rim cannot hold back. He can't help himself.
Yeah, we were talking about ponies for a while before the episode. So.
I just said not in the show.
Yeah, not in the
I
show.
I could only restrain myself so much.
Oh my god. So yeah, ponies.
Ponies.
And very briefly in the meta moment, we will be this weekend at Saturday, pretty much all day, or at least most of it, at the Mocha Festival in
I
New
think
York
it starts
City.
at 11 a.m.
Yeah, whenever it starts, we'll be there around that time.
Yep.
I plan to talk to pretty much everyone at every table.
Yep.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
I
no
thought
more,
you
no more
said
ponies.
no more ponies.
It was accidental pony.
Accidental pony? You can't hold it in?
Stop extending it.
Wait a minute. I just noticed that, because I'm looking at our con schedule, because I was about to announce that, don't forget,
Anime Boston.
April 22nd through 24th in Boston at the Heine, we will be at Anime Boston doing a shit ton of panels.
Are we really doing a shit ton? I thought we were only doing like 4.
We're doing like 4.
All right.
We've really cut down from our days of 7 or 8 panels at cons.
Forget
and-
those days.
No,
those days
fuck
are
those
gone.
days.
Fuck those days.
Yeah. But I just noticed, I think someone might have told us before and I forgot, that there's a band playing Saturday night called Stereo Pony.
I don't think that band actually has anything to do with My Little Pony.
No, but it's Nomen.
Some people are planning a brony meetup at Otakon.
Oh. We should be the ones who force the impromptu brony meetup at Anime Boston.
I'm sure there will be a brony meetup. Anime.
Yeah. Well, has Daryl Surratt seen it yet?
I don't know.
Because the last I heard, he had not actually watched an episode yet.
Whatever.
If that is true, I'll make him watch. Anyway, we will be at Anime Boston doing panels like anime openers from around the world and Who is Hatsune Miku?
Yep. High quality panels that have been rarely seen.
Yeah, I've done anime openers, I think, once.
At Anime Boston.
Yeah, and it was a way different panel.
I did Miku once at Kineticon. It was the best panel ever, but there was hardly anyone in there because it was late at night. And now it's going to be the awesomest panel you've ever seen.
Yep. And, of course, the book club book was Michio Kaku's Hyperspace, which we're now going to talk about.
Yep.
You going to announce the next book?
Well, actually, I had a book in mind. My favoriteest book of ever.
The Little Prince?
No, that was
the,
that's
Sword
my
in the
second
Stone?
favorite book ever.
Sword and Stone?
That's probably my third favoriteest book ever.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, I was gonna pick that book.
The Claire Bibble.
My favoriteest book ever. But you know what? I changed my mind like yesterday.
God damn it.
So I'm glad I didn't say anything. And you know why I changed my mind?
You want to read something you've never read?
That's right. And also, because I read Hyperspace and it gave me an idea.
Well, whatever it is, you're going to have to wait, because a book I've been waiting for a long time is going to be delivered to my door any day.
It's all right. We waited a long time to do Hyperspace, and I think that was worthwhile. But Hyperspace gave me the idea of the book that I should choose. And then after that, I will go and choose my favoriteest book ever. And
So what, Brief History of the Universe?
No,
One
we're
of
going to
those?
read. You know what we're going to read?
What are we going to read?
Fucking Foundation, bitches. That's right.
Foundation.
That's right. Foundation number 1.
Yeah,
Boom.
I should actually read that.
Bought all 3 on Amazon. Well, actually, there's more than 3, but I bought the original 3 on Amazon.
That's all we're doing.
Yep.
Yeah.
1. We're not doing all 3. We're doing just the first one.
Yeah, you know,
Otherwise, we'll be here all night.
it's about time I actually did read Foundation.
That's right.
It's
So,
weird. As much as I know about it, I've never actually read it.
I started to read it one time. I think my parents have like a hardcover that's like a 3-in-1, but I bought the 3 separate ones. So we're gonna read. We're just gonna read the first Foundation, by Asimov, and that's it.
All right.
So there you go, done. And then next time it is my turn. I'll read my favoriteest book ever.
So when I was a kid, this was a long time ago, and I didn't realize how long ago it was until I read Hyperspace again. I read Hyperspace, a scientific odyssey through parallel universes, time warps, and the 10th dimension. I don't even know why I read Hyperspace. Like, I don't know if someone gave it to me, if I just found it in the bookstore. Like, I don't remember. All I know is that when I was really young, in like 1995 or 1996,
Well, the book came out in like 93?
94.
94, okay.
I read it, and it seemed really profound to me, and I forgot about it. And then, I was kind of reminded of it recently because I read that Bryson book and a bunch of other books on science. I was like, oh, Hyperspace. I could read that again. I think it's a good book. We just did Cosmos. It fits with my theme, and, we'll see how it stands up. It amazes me how little I had remembered from that book, from reading it as a kid. But at the same time, it amazes me how much I realize now that Hyperspace affected my worldview. Like reading this book as a kid and thinking about the things I cared about as I got older and the things I was interested in and what I understood, didn't understand, and thought I understood but didn't about particle physics. And even like what I got into in high school, like when I really started gravitating toward physics and away from biology and away from chemistry and toward math, and the fact that I got really, really, really fucking into math toward the end of high school and actually considered for a while going into math like as a career. Obviously that would have been maybe a mistake, but
Definitely.
I don't know. Actually, my coworkers, a lot of them on the research side, are trying to convince me to go back and get like a master's in mathematics.
Sure.
I would if I didn't have to pay for it. If I had a full ride to go back to college and learn math, hell's fuck yeah.
Math was great up until calculuses.
Calculus was my favorite thing.
I do not like calculus.
See, in
It's
high
not
school, we used to
fun.
have calculus parties. We'd get together. This was like when I was a senior. We'd watch The Simpsons.
How many people were at these party? 2?
Like 8.
Okay.
I mean, look, like my AP bio class was, I don't know, 12 people total. So
Anyway, let's
Yeah.
talk about this book.
So Hyperspace, like the analogies, I think that's where it really shows. Like whenever, up until I reread this book, I would make an analogy for anything related to physics or time or space or math or anything. Almost all of those analogies, I realized, came out of Hyperspace, and I just forgotten that that's where they came from.
Yeah, I mean, I never read the book, but I've always also been an analogy person. And when it comes to science, I'm obviously weak, very weak in the math department, right? But I'm very strong, or at least I think I'm very strong, in the conceptual department.
So words that were said by one of my favorite physics teachers in high school were that, and I quote, as well as I can remember, everybody likes the conceptual side of physics because you don't need to know fucking anything.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Because I said the same thing to him. I was
Well,
like,
he even says so in this book. There's a part pretty close to the end. He's like, look, if you just want to describe, conceptually what we've learned in physics, it's actually pretty simple, right? It's like you could say it in a few sentences. But to actually describe why we know that and how we know that.
metric tensors.
Yeah, right? Forget that. But thing is, even though this book talks about a lot of math, it doesn't actually do any math. Right? He names equations and he describes what, he's like, so there's an equation called this, a metric tensor, and a metric tensor means this.
Well, he shows you like a matrix. He's like, all right. And then when he shows those boxes where he's like, here's where Einstein's theory fits in. Here's this. And you see them like growing out. Like when those two
So it's like,
drawings.
I couldn't, based on this, I couldn't actually do any of this math, obviously. But if you showed me an equation and said what the name of the equation was, I'd be like, oh, that's the equation that does this thing, right? And it's like I can match the conceptual ideas with the names of the mathematical equations. And actually, if I understood and knew how to read those mathematical equations, I could probably say, oh, that's the one that matches up with that idea. And so it's like you can't think about the math directly, but it gives you sort of this idea of which maths are used for what.
Well, I think as a kid, though, what this book did is Cosmos is very different, but they both serve the same purpose. They're like, hey, you guys realize that science is actually the most awesome thing, right?
Yeah, it's very similar to Cosmos in a lot of ways because he talks about the history.
Yep.
He's talking about all the old science. He does a lot of storytelling of old scientists.
Delivery, like Sagan's style of getting people excited about science is more of a awe and like, oh my God, how many anythings there are anywhere. Just think about that. Whoa.
Yeah, he doesn't do a lot of that here.
Now, Kaku does more this thing of, yeah, fucking wormholes. Holy shit. Yeah, they might be real. Oh, here's the math.
But instead of being like, trying to awe you with the wonders of the universe, he does a lot more practical stuff. Like, he's like, so what does this mean for you?
Yep.
And, oh, well, this discovery, well, what did that mean?
Yep, like, all right, the universe is going to end. Can we do anything about that?
Yeah.
Huh, and he actually poses like, hey, maybe we can.
He's like, there's a chance that we can do this, and there's a chance that we can do that. He doesn't really, have any definitive things, because, well, the science, except for where the science is definitive.
Yep.
It's like he's directly in line with whatever the science says. He's like, could there be a God? And as you read through the book, it's like, yes, nope, yes, nope, yes, no, maybe, yes, no, but then... towards the end, he's like, well, you can't have the God of miracles, but you can have the God of order. And it's like, oh, make up your mind, dude.
Yep.
Because as you learn more sciences throughout the book, the answers to he keeps asking the same questions again, and you keeps answering them differently because you learned a new thing, so now the answer has changed.
I do enjoy how he went through, and with like light as a particle and different aspects where he's like, well, based on everything we've talked about so far, it seems like this is true. And the next chapter is basically, yeah, that's a bunch of horse shit, and here's why.
Yeah. I mean, he also does a lot of concentration on, the theoretical versus the experimental. He's like, experimentally, standard model is the king, right? There's just so much evidence. It's unbelievable. It always works. But it doesn't work 100%. So we got to go to this. But we can't actually use the string theory because we would need the energy of a hajillion, and we don't have that. And we're not going to have that for a long time.
I also think about, remember how when we were at RIT and we'd argue about physics or causality or whatever, I'd always be like, yeah, the Planck constant, the Planck limit. That's because I read Hyperspace as a kid. Yeah. Planck didn't come up that much in my physics classes.
No, I still have, that is one thing that a lot of the things he describes in this book, right, I have a much better conceptual understanding of after reading it, obviously, like strings and such.
Yep.
But one thing, I do have a better understanding of it, but I still have a hard time understanding it, right, is the idea that there's these other dimensions. I understand there are other dimensions. Obviously, I can't picture them in my brain, but I can understand multiple spatial dimensions. What I still have a hard time thinking about is that the other spatial dimensions are collapsed. It's like, what? Like, I understand mathematically they're collapsed, and I can understand that the fact that they are collapsed, but I can't actually picture
funny.
Why they're collapsed. Like, why can't they just be fully
Remember the part in Cosmos where Sagan talks about the fact that we don't know for sure if our universe is open or closed?
Mm-hmm.
A dimension can be the same thing. A spherical dimension would be closed in that you can go infinitely in any direction along the surface, but yet there is a finite amount of space, but yet infinite space, depending on how you look at it, that it's closed in on itself, that there's like this discrete...
So there's an edge?
But there is no edge.
Okay, so here, let me think about this.
There's no edge whether or not it's open or closed. It either loops back on itself or goes off forever.
So it's either Pac-Man or it's infinity.
Yeah.
Okay, so the thing is, let's pretend that the third dimension, so you have a cube, right?
Yep.
What if the third dimension was collapsed, resulting in 2 dimensions, but there's really 3, but the third one's collapsed? What would that be like? Because we can imagine that, right?
Same thing.
So what would that be like, though? Would it be like Flatland, but you can go around you can Pac-Man?
Yeah.
Right? So, but then where's the third dimension? Is it just the cube got flattened, but there is a cube, it's just a really short cube?
The way I think...
So there is an up and down, but you can't actually go up and down because as soon as you go up, you Pac-Man to the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, think of it this
so
way.
you can't really tell there's an up and down?
The way I always envision it is,
even though there is?
You can see me, I'm savo-tendering right now,
All
but for all you know, I'm moving back and forth all over the place in this fourth dimension, but because it's so small, I'm just looping back around and there's no way to detect that I've moved.
So there is a fourth dimension, but it's like if you squish a cube like a pancake, right? So there is a third dimension. Even though we think we're in Flatland, we can actually jump up and down a little bit. But because it's Pac-Man, when you get to the top, when you jump up and down, it doesn't actually look like you're jumping up and down because you're hardly actually jumping because your head comes out the bottom.
Well, another complication, I don't know if this was in Hyperspace
Flatland.
or not because I read it again long time ago. It took a while for us to do this episode. But three-dimensional physical space is the only place where a knot can exist.
I know he didn't give me the math for that, but it reminded me of that thing of the day you had a long time ago. What was that one?
Oh, the four-dimensional knots?
Yeah, whatever that thing. There was the thing of the day you had. It just reminded me of it. I don't know.
I remember a four-dimensional game that.
No, it was like
around.
some visualization of some.
Oh, it's the one where you take this three-dimensional shape and cross it over itself without breaking it.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Oh, God, I'll try to find that. That was amazing.
Yeah, so anyway, there were, of course, reading a book like this, right, someone like me who doesn't know any math is going to come up with crazy ideas, right?
Yep.
So I came up with 2 crazy ideas I would like to discuss.
All right.
All right, so crazy idea number 1. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
So at one point, he talks about light actually being a vibration of the 4th dimension, right?
Yep.
So is that true or not? Or is that just, in progress kind of thing?
It makes sense.
Okay, so if we pretend that light is a vibration of the 4th dimension, right?
Yes.
That means, let's combine it with another idea that we understand very well. You ready?
Uh-huh.
Photosynthesis. So you got a plant.
Scott, there was just an article on Slashdot not that long ago talking about quantum effects and how important they are to photosynthesis. Now
Really?
we're just starting to figure
I don't read
this out.
Slashdot anymore.
Well, maybe you should.
Maybe I should, because I was thinking, wow, there's a wave in the 4th dimension, shakes some molecules and atoms or whatever inside a plant, and then the plant eats it. How crazy is that shit?
So, Scott,
that is crazy.
Think about it even one step further. Imagine that we're in Flatland, right?
All right.
And say that light or whatever, in some other dimension, there's a sheet that's like vibrating like waves. So say a wave, like a bulb, pops up through Flatland momentarily. Depending on at what point we observe it, say it's oscillating. So it's a wave, like a dome.
So it appears and disappears.
So it's a bubble going up and down, up and down, up and down, intersecting with our universe from some point.
Okay.
If the absolute peak of that wave is the exact point of our universe, then it appears, and it's a point, an oscillating point that appears and disappears infinitely and regularly.
Okay, but it's if it's only a point, it's kind of hard to see, though.
But it's there.
All right, sure.
And we can interact with it. Maybe it messes stuff up.
Yeah, it might pop up like in just like the worst place in your brain and hurt you.
If it's just a little bit taller, it's a circle now instead. A circle that keeps appearing and disappearing.
That's correct.
So think about that in terms of electrons and the fact that they're not a point, they're a particle. They're not even, they're like a wave of probability that we know they're like, this is the area where it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And we know it's somewhere in there, but we can't know where it is specifically. And maybe that has something to do with, imagine, that dimension, something appearing in our universe repeatedly in that manner that I described, the bubble coming in through Flatland.
Mm-hmm.
Like the area where it's intersecting our universe is the probability wave, but the actual structure of the electron, the reason we can't really interact with it directly is because it is actually just of oscillation on that other dimension.
Mm.
It's not a thing, but in our universe it manifests as a thing.
Mm.
That would also explain why there are so many different particles.
Yeah. So my second crazy idea isn't
I'm
really...
sure Timo is like just knocking that hoof against his
I'm
forehead.
sure every real physicist listening to us non-physicists is going crazy, and for that we apologize.
Scott, what if a computer...
But you should be glad that we are interested, and we are not people who believe in metaphysical or
Scott, you want to
pseudoscientific things.
Scott, and all computer people...
We are just curious, and we know we are unlearned, and we do not believe things
Scott,
that are crazy.
You and all computer people can now... I'm going to do something. I will use magic to let you experience exactly exactly what all the physicists listening to this episode are right now.
All right.
Man, so computers use binary, right? It's just like zeros and ones. What if I had like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It'd be so much more powerful.
We could do that, but in fact, if they're physicists, they will know that how a transistor works, and a transistor is actually a quantum device, right? So they would know that you couldn't have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if they were physicists. But if they were normal people, they would think you could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which you can actually do. It's just, there have been computers that use more than 0 and 1, and they just kind of suck and they're hard to program.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. Also, the way we do logic is not as easy or useful.
No. But anyway, here's my second crazy idea, which isn't really that crazy. It's actually just, a increased understanding, right? So I always, since it was explained to me originally, I always sort of understood Einstein's gravity, right? You got a lot of mass. When you have a lot of mass, if you have a two-dimensional universe and you have a heavy thing, it's going to put a big dent in it, and that dent is actually a three-dimensional dent in the two-dimensional universe. So things seem to be falling into it, even though you can't see why they're falling into it because you're a two-dimensional person.
Yep.
And likewise, in 3 dimensions, when there's a heavy thing, right, with a lot of mass, it makes a big dent, but it's a 4-dimensional dent, so things fall into it, right, and gravity, whatever, right? But think about this, right? So if there was a 4-dimensional thing, and let's say I was a 4-dimensional person, and I was not touching the 3rd dimension, and then I punched it, right?
Yeah.
So I put my fist into it. What's going to happen? Well, they're going to see, 3-dimensional people are going to see.
I'm going to say that it's not that you're putting your fist into the 3rd dimension. It's that there is a thing in the 3rd dimension that there's a 3-dimensional thing. It's the equivalent of me. I'm holding, say this piece of paper is actually totally flat and there's things living on it that are effectively 2-dimensional. And I just start fucking with them.
Yeah.
I'm not putting my hand into the 2nd dimension. I'm just interacting with a 4-dimensional object that happens to have...
Oh, so you're saying that... So we live in a 3rd-dimensional object that is floating in a 4th dimension, and a lot of that 4th dimension isn't touching us. Only some of it is touching us.
I guess that's the best way we can say it.
Anyway, but the point is, if something from the 4th dimension were to enter our dimension, right, it would sort of appear out of a point and grow larger, right? It would be like if a basketball came in, a 4-dimensional basketball, so a 4-ball, right? They threw it at us, right? They poked at us. We would see a basketball. It would start out as like a dot. It would grow to a full basketball, and then it would shrink again into another dot, right?
Or something like that.
Something along those lines. But isn't that what, the sun looks like, right? It's got, it gets bigger, and gravity makes it smaller, right? So it's like, that lends itself, gravity versus things from the 4th dimension, things, all matter being something from the 4th dimension protruding into the 3rd dimension, right?
Well, Scott, if gravity is a distortion of space-time or something like that, then that's a dip in another dimension, effectively.
No, but I'm saying is that if all matter is actually something from the 4th dimension poking its way in, right?
Yeah.
And then gravity is sort of it being sucked back out to the 4th dimension.
Well, Scott,
that's
exactly what I guess it would be, in that if all the individual particles are just the manifestations of strings or waves or whatever in this multidimensional universe we can't really interact with, then what we are is just kind of this metastructure that is manifest of all those other things that themselves are unrelated to their constituents.
Yeah.
I was really struggling to have a sentence there.
But you see, that's the thing is you look at a star and its gravity, and you look at the 4-dimensional basketball just sort of passing by, and it's the same sort of thing.
Now the trouble we have is
it looks the same.
The trouble we have to watch out for is that we can fall into the trap of the anthropic principle of it's very easy for us to analogize things because they appear similar on the surface.
And they're complete bullshit, and the math doesn't even match at all.
Of course, Sagan, because I was randomly watching...
But, like a star going into a black hole looks the same with our eyeballs as a 4-dimensional basketball leaving our dimension.
Remember in Cosmos...
It shrinks to a point and goes away.
When Sagan points out that if our universe is closed, it's as though our entire universe is contained within, or it is effectively, an electron, but one in a greater universe, and that every point particle in our universe is in fact a closed universe that itself, and it's ad infinitum up and down.
Yeah, but I don't think that, you could fit a billion galaxies in one of our electrons. That's not in there.
Why not?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not in there.
Then how do you know we're not an electron?
I'm pretty sure that our universe of a billion galaxies is not an electron. Maybe.
Why not?
Maybe it's a proton.
I don't think you listen to Carl Sagan that much.
I don't think it could be that. This isn't Turtles All the Way Down.
So I did ask Timo, our non-resident expert on these matters.
Oh, what did you ask him?
I was like, hey, so Hyperspace. I was talking a little bit, and he gave me permission to read this, but he gave a short, like, mini review of his feelings in Hyperspace. My question was, here, let me find the exact question that I asked him. I can't find it. I was basically like, hey,
But you have the answer, but you don't have the question.
is Hyperspace legit? Did anything
That is something I do want to
change?
comment on. Oh, actually, there's two things I want to comment on. So one thing, if you were not someone who understood science and math, and you read this book, just from the look, like if you were not an educated person, like if you were, very uneducated.
Oh, it's rock solid.
No. But this book, even though it is rock solid, I agree, right? The way it presents itself physically and with diagrams and in its wording, right? Easily and on a surface level, very much resembles pretty much any Time Cube Randy book. And you have to have some sort of beginning knowledge or intelligence to be able to tell the difference between this and Time Cube.
You want to know why? Two-dimensional, simple drawings that illustrate very powerful analogies that directly relate to feelings people have. Look at the fourth way.
Yeah, I know, exactly. So, it's like, what really does separate this from Time Cube besides the fact that the math is right and as opposed to the math is not made up? And if you're not an expert who can tell, you whatever book you read first, Time Cube or Hyperspace is going to get you.
You know
right?
how you solve that? If I read Time Cube, all right, Time Cube. I read a different book that isn't Time Cube, they don't match up.
That's true.
If I read Hyperspace and then some other quantum physics book, they're going to match up quite a bit.
They are. And as for the up-to-dateness, I was also thinking about that because this book is from 94.
Yep.
It's at least a lot of years later. Right? There had to be some development since then. So there are things in this book that are out of date. For example, he talks about the superconducting super collider. We already know that we now have the Hadron Collider, right? He didn't know about that when he wrote the book.
Yep.
But we haven't found anything huge there yet.
Yet.
But anyway, so that sort of thing is out of date. But I thought about the out of dateness of this book when I was reading it, and I was like, 20 years, whatever. But reading the book, most of the time, what's he talking about? He's talking about people like von Neumann or Riemann or Einstein or even Newton, right?
Yep.
And it's like those guys are centuries old.
Scott, I point out, who does Sagan talk about? Ancient Greeks.
Right. So he's talking about these old scientists, right? And even a lot of the ones, even the more recent ones he talks about are early 20th century guys, and their shit still holds up. He's got you look at the Matrix he's got and whose names are in there, Maxwell and Einstein. Those are not recent dudes, right? I mean, so if there was something, and if their stuff is still legit after centuries, then in the 20-something years since this book has been written, I don't think, the odds of there being something devastatingly huge that changes this book completely and makes it invalid are pretty low if centuries couldn't have invalidated these other guys, right? If their stuff is still right, then the stuff in this book is still going to be mostly right and right enough for a layman like myself who's never going to do any sort of scientific experiment in this department.
Well, one thing that's really cool is that, look at Cosmos. I was reading through all the errata, like all the updates since Cosmos came out.
Mm-hmm.
Very few corrections. Very few outright, this was wrong. Mostly it's, we confirmed this even more, or we confirmed something even crazier than we suspected.
Yeah.
Or, this science is happening, things like that.
There was some article, I don't remember what it was, but I read it, I think, yesterday. I just read it really quickly. I didn't even bother. But it was about a very similar hyperspace-related topic on a real science blog. And a lot of the stuff that was written in that post was, totally just straight from this book. And I was like, I understood half that blog post because it was just out of this book. So if it hasn't changed since a blog post from yesterday, I think this book is still incredibly valuable to someone who wants to learn about this and is not yet so out of date it's no longer worth reading.
So from Timo, who is a physicist who actually does know what he's talking about.
10 billion times more than we do.
I read Hyperspace over the weekend, and here's the short of it. Too many boring anecdotes and strained analogies.
But I like anecdotes and analogies.
Especially strained ones.
Yes.
Longer. Here's the long of it. I am tempted to say that there are too many overly generalized explanations, but in hindsight, I'd say that he doesn't actually explain anything. The book is basically a dog and pony show
Yep.
of neat ideas.
Yep.
At that, it doesn't fail completely. Although there are parts where I get an interesting insight into his thoughts on some meaningful physical concepts, they're few and far between. The book is scientifically sound.
That's good.
Although mostly old news.
Yeah, well, duh. It's 94. It's old news.
There has been,
especially for someone who's a professional.
This is the part I got to learn more about. There has been a second revolution in string theory in the early 2000s.
Oh, so that is the thing. That is the only thing that's not in this book, probably.
Also, over the last decade, cosmology has become a precision science and added a lot of new opportunities for testing some of the ideas in the latter part of the book. That I'm really excited about.
I want to learn about that.
17 years
Tell
is
me
a
where I
long
can read
time,
more.
even for the glacial pace that science advances
Yeah,
with.
see, glacial pace of science.
All in
which I
all,
just
it's
just
not a
mentioned.
bad popular science book. But I'm a scientist, so I see all the ifs and buts.
No
and
kidding.
And I want more meat on my explanations.
Of course, if there's a computer science book that was written like this, it would have little to no value for me.
The thing is, this is
right?
a book to where you could throw this at almost anyone, and they could
You could
get
throw it at a nerdy middle school student or a or a B or higher high school student.
I think that the best person to give this
at
to
a good high school.
is someone who's a little nerdy, who like early on in their.
I think it's best if there's a kid who's starting to who actually shows interest in science. Like if they're in science class and they go ooh, or if they watch Discovery Channel and they're like oh, and they go even once, you got to give them this book.
Yep.
Or Cosmos or any of those similar books.
Yes.
And
But I think middle school is the age because that, end of middle school, early high school.
It's like they'll get some of it, but they won't understand a lot of it as well.
And if they're like me, it'll influence them in surprising ways.
I mean, I still can't even really understand how a dimension collapses besides Pac-Man.
Yeah, and I can talk out my ass for hours and hours.
So Pac-Man's is actually in a three-dimensional space, but the third dimension collapsed
Actually,
on Pac-Man.
Pac-Man, because he can go. Depends on the map. Can you just go out the sides or the top two?
You can go at the sides and the top.
Okay, so come up with a shape that works. You've got a shape that crosses over itself.
Oh, didn't he say there was one point where he said it was like Pac-Man's on a cylinder, or no, he's on a torus, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But it's like, how can Pac-Man be on a torus? I don't know, whatever. But if he's on a torus, then it's three-dimensional, but it's a collapsed torus? I still don't get it.
That's why we need a book with more meat on it now. I think we've gotten past this point.
I want to see a picture of a three-dimensional universe where the third dimension collapsed.
I guess
so it's only.
I'm glad I read this book when I was much younger because I think there are better books for someone of my age to read on these topics. I think I could do for a little more math.
Yeah, I could. I could
At
do
one
for
point,
a little more
Kaku's
math.
like, the math is unimportant, but let's move on.
Yeah, the math is just kind of hard.
Yeah, I would at least like more of the grounding of the math, like more of the, all right, here's what this implies mathematically, and here's why it implies that.
Yeah. The only thing that I sort of question, and obviously I'm 100% sure I'm wrong, right?
Yeah.
Is that, he keeps showing you the matrix of like Einstein in the top left, then Maxwell, then Yang-Mills, right? He's like, now we have enough room. It's like adding more dimensions increases the size of the matrix, which means you have more room to fit stuff in there, which means you can add these, now we can add all these guys in and everything fits together, right? And I understood that conceptually very well. But
Putting
it's
stuff
like,
in, taking stuff
right,
out.
but it's like
deep in other people.
But at the same time, I was thinking, obviously wrong mathematically, right? Obviously. But it's like, couldn't I just make any matrix bigger and fit in any kind of maths I wanted? I could make a giant matrix and fit all the math in the world in it. It would totally work. So how is that? So what does that even mean, right?
I guess
and that was my stupid and incorrect thinking.
Well, I guess my way around that is
it's
that
like, yeah, I can take two completely unrelated things, make a big enough matrix so that there's enough spots in there to put both of them.
But if you make it bigger,
does that make them related?
If you make it too much bigger, like bigger than it needs to be, there's this extra space in there. You don't have anything to put in that space. So there's a hole that you can't fill that's meaningless.
Well, there are some little holes that he said they do put something in there, but he said, yeah, we're not going to talk about what they put in that corner bit. Because it has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Yeah, about 3 times reading this book again, I went to Wikipedia and tried to learn more about metric tensors. And I even asked some of the mathematicians at work. And one of them, I was like, so I'm interested in metric tensors. And he looked at me and he said, really? And I said, yes. And he said, why? Reading some Kaku?
Okay.
All right. So we've got our new book. We had our old book. I think it's a worthwhile read, especially if you've got like a nerdy cousin who's younger than you or something, or like a nerdy nephew or niece, and you need a book to give them, like a science book that'll get them thinking.
Yeah, also, it's like I delayed starting of reading it, by a lot of time, mostly because I was busy with other things. But once I started reading it, I not only did I have to finish it quickly to be in time for this episode, I finished it last night, but I really wanted to finish it very quickly. You kept wanting to read more.
I dragged through the first chapter.
And that's a sign of a good book.
Because I remembered it pretty well. But then after that, it was like, whoa, wait, what? Oh.
Yeah. So it's once it's the kind of thing where it's like you won't want to start reading it because it's nonfiction and it's science.
Kind of like how no one wants to play a goddamn wooden cube game until they play it, then they love it.
But once you start reading it, you're not going to stop reading.
Just like My Little Pony. This has been Geek Nights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music, Kat Lee for web design, and Brando K for the logos.
Be sure to visit our website at frontrowcrew.com for show notes, discussion, news, and more.
Remember, Geek Nights is not one, but 4 different shows. Sci-Tech Mondays, Gaming Tuesdays, Anime Comic Wednesdays, and Indiscriminate Thursdays.
Geek Nights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Geek Nights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.